Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Networking. We all know that we have to do it in order to advance in our careers. Men actually treat networking like a job, but what about women? Do you book yourself to attend a networking event and in the last minute cancel? You might be selling the art of networking short. So to discuss networking and self-care for women, I'm joined by Carol Penhale, President and CEO of Bedford Park Associates, which she founded in 2010. Carol, welcome to Empowered.
Thank you, Liz. Thrilled to be here. Very happy to talk to you about this topic. I think this is something we really need to talk about.
And that's what I was just about to say. I think this is really important and very, very underestimated. So how do you define networking?
It's something as simple as what we're doing right now or watching something on TV. But definitely social networking, visiting people at networking events and conferences. That's all part of it. And there's professional and social networking. I'm going to talk about a little bit about both today because I think a lot of your audience are women. They do social networking already. Mm-hmm. They just don't realize they have those skills and they need to be honed a bit for the professional environment.
You know, that's really important to know. So let's go back to, how do you define networking?
So I would say it's us sitting here, have a conversation, talking to people at conferences, talking to people on the street about stuff. Women do a lot of networking. Anybody who has kids and you've been to a sporting event and you're talking to other parents about trying to organize the carpooling, that's networking. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of those skills already. We just don't think about honing them for our careers. Which is equally important and we need to find time for.
You know, I think as women, we underestimate what we know and our strengths. So I'm really glad that you brought up the fact that networking is something that you can do even when you're carpooling or at a sporting event, because we underestimate what networking actually is. Now, some people refer to networking as self-care. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's different types of self-care. I don't think it's like going to the spa, which we all enjoy. And I think that's important for our social well-being. But I think there's a self-care for our careers and our jobs. And we have to pay the same attention for the self-care of where we're going, particularly in an environment where jobs and careers and the environment changes so quickly. The job you may do today may be very different 10 years from now, and you need to plan for it. So I put together some stats for your audience. I thought that would be helpful. It's a bit sobering in terms of the impact of it in business, but certainly from the standpoint of women and where we need to pull up our socks a bit and do more of it.
And this is important. Like, I think it's important, but why do you think networking is so important for women? Because it is underestimated.
I think COVID changed everything. There's still a lot of people wanting to work from home and, have the fuzzy slippers on and work in front of the computer. And it's hard to advance your career or meet other people. There are a number of things that are very important in terms of networking. Stats are that 38% of people think networking is hard. I'm surprised it's that low because it's difficult. It's a lot of work to do that. Many careers out there, they have to do self-accreditation. So they have to keep their skills up to speed. For the rest of us, I'm not in a profession like that. For the rest of us, from my standpoint, networking is a sweat equity component to be able to do that. Learn what your industry is doing, what other people are doing. It's very important from that standpoint to have a circumspect perspective in terms of where the world is.
Okay, so how will networking benefit our viewers in their personal and professional lives?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we could look at from the standpoint of how we'll apply to them. The stats that I was looking at to prepare for this, I live this. This is my mantra. I live this every day. But for a lot of people, I thought, okay, they may not think this is just Carol passionate about this and she's up here having to chat with Liz. But the stats are quite gruesome. Over 80% of jobs are not listed anywhere. So how would you find them? In the old days, probably when we were younger, you would find things in the newspaper. Right. Only 1% of jobs are in newspapers now. When you submit a CV to a recruiter, women are 26% less likely to have their profile clicked on than a man. I have no idea why.
Interesting.
But it makes it very difficult for us to stand out if, we're behind the eight ball to some degree. So we have to push harder than everyone else to even get a seat at the table for acknowledgement. And that's become more prevalent in this day and age where technology is used for everything.
So hold that thought.
Yes.
When we come back, we'll continue. So please don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today, we're discussing the importance of networking for women. Carol, before we went to break, we were talking about networking, how it benefits women in their personal and professional lives. Did you have any more to add to that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is when you network in events, it gives you more confidence professionally and personally. Secondly, you may be trying to advance the ball on a topic in your industry, and you're not, there's really don't have any kindred spirits to talk to where you are today. And you can go to an event and you'll meet somebody and going, wow, they're on the same page I am. This is great. And so it gives you a sense of empowerment, to quote on your show, in terms of feeling I'm not the only one who's looking at this. And it feels very good from that standpoint. And I think, lastly, one of the stats are that only 25% of people network. So you want to be in that 25%. You don't want to be in the 75% that's assuming everything is just going to move status quo and you're going to be able to advance along. Use the tools at your discretion to move your career along, and you'll feel better about yourself in a lot of situations. As we mentioned, self-care. I find networking a tremendous way for me to recalibrate where I am with my own business, what we do in our organization, what our footprint should look like, how we communicate with people. And a big chunk of that comes from networking and listening to people when you're talking to them, and have them listen to you and see what they're responding to and what they're not.
Well, it's a huge learning experience.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So, you're learning about somebody else and they're learning about you. And I think we need to keep doing this in order to get bigger and better. Yes.
And so one of the reasons I put together some stats for your audience was I'm sure there are people out there saying, yeah, but, I'm looking at Carol, I'm looking at Liz, they're extroverts. Why are we talking to them? But if you look at the statistics that I've seen, women who are networking are finding it's advancing their careers in all different ways. And secondly, a lot of women don't understand how important those stats are in terms of the impact of their awareness. If people don't know that you exist, how are they ever going to hire you?
Right, right. This is very true. So like everything else going digital,
yes.
Has technology changed the priority of networking, the need for women in their careers to network?
100%. So I was talking to somebody just a few weeks ago, and it was at a bank, and they had a job opening, and it was only posted for 5 days, which is a small window when you're trying to peruse the whole network. They had 296 applicants in those 5 days. So it's really hard to stand out in that sea of people applying, because a lot of them are extremely qualified. So you need to find ways to advance your statistics and get yourself out there. And so, I think something like 23% of people who found new jobs said even though they applied through the HR segment, they also reached out to contacts they had at the company or in the industry to influence so they could be one of the 296 resumes that got reviewed. And in this day and age, I can tell you that's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, you're just relying on luck that you're going to get to the top of the pile. There's technology that gets used as well, what are called ATSs. And artificial intelligence. And so when you answer all those questions online that say, how do you identify, where do you live, what do you do, are you willing to relocate? They're using those questions to screen people out. And so you have to be aware of that as you're going through the process, because it can be quite debilitating if you apply for dozens of jobs and you never hear back from anybody. You think it's something wrong with you. And it's not, it's the process.
Yeah, the process is so much harder now. It's almost like a blind process now, because you really don't know whether, when you apply for something, whether you're there, whether you're not even competing with anyone else. So it's a very difficult process. But do women have a tendency not to value networking as highly as men do? And if so, why?
Absolutely. I think it's more second nature for men. Maybe they're trained with, maybe they're just more, I think there's a number of things behind that. But I think very high on that list is some statistics I found that women in Canada are 26% less likely to network than men. Men are more likely to ask for a referral. men are more likely to ask for some help in a job. And I found a really depressing statistic, because I work in both the business space, but I also work in the technology space. And so depending on the industry your viewers are in, they may see different optics. But I found a stat on the technology sector, and at the pace of change for women in the technology sector, it will be 132 years to this equality.
Wow.
I don't know about you, but I try to live a
won't be
healthy
there.
life. Neither will I. So, and I'm sure it's different in other sectors, but 132 years is an awful long time.
Yeah.
So we have to accelerate the pace of change, and we can rely on governments and regulatory bodies, but we have to rely on ourselves to push ourselves forward too.
And that's a really good point. We do have to rely on ourselves to push ourselves forward. So don't go away. We'll be right back with more networking tips. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today, we are talking about networking for women and the importance of how networking can help advance you. So I want to talk about the correlation between networking and wage advancement gaps for women versus men.
I gave that a lot of thought in terms of, how do we start talking about that? But that gets into a bit of certainly there are discretionary issues with women getting paid less than men in so many industries. But I think what is more important to focus on is the advancements that women have seen when they've done networking. And so it's a project that they've been able to move on, that they've gone onto a board, they got a salary advance, they got new members added to their team. All those things were because of networking. And in my experience, when you get passionate about stuff and you start networking and those things start happening, the money follows. And so definitely we all know, everybody's seen it. We see it in the papers every week. We see it on TV. Sure, we've seen it on your show. Women are getting paid less than men. Why? So this is one of those areas where we can help push and equal those pay gaps a bit. I just mentioned 132 years on the tech side.
Yeah.
That's pretty sad.
And I had Lita Prima on the show earlier.
Yes.
And we were talking about the gender wage gap. And for every dollar a man makes, a woman makes 87 cents.
Yes.
And, over 20 years, it's $260,000 that we've left behind.
Yes.
So, this is a really good way to help advance us.
Yes.
So for somebody who has never networked before and has heard it, but says, I'm just going to go and have a drink and party or whatever. How do you get started? And what exactly is it?
So there's lots of different ways to do this. And so there's a lot of people who will say, wait a second, Carol and Liz are obviously extroverts. I could never do this. But everybody thinks that's one of the myths. And, I'll talk about that later on, is that networking is for extroverts, and it's not. There are lots of ways to do this. You can start small and get comfortable. A lot of that is comfort level, because if you go out and you speak about your own thoughts and opinions on stuff, you're going, gee, I'm not so how well I'm going to be received. And then when you find out, gee, it wasn't too bad at all, you start to get them over those hurdles. And as I mentioned earlier, everybody does networking to some degree now. And actually, women are really good at it. We're very good at social networking. We just don't seem to, all the stats point to that. We're better at the social networking than men. We just don't seem to take that skill set and hone it to our professional careers. And I don't care what the career is. What you want to do as a job, you need to do that. And so starting small with something like social media, because it's very anonymous. You can sit behind the screens. The tools that people use, you can talk to people on the phone and mail, email, but that's very much one-to-one communication. You want to move to as many to many communications as you can. But for a lot of people, that's a cosmic leap or jumping over the Grand Canyon. So you start with something you're comfortable with and move from there. But I think the strongest message I could send to women is that you already do a lot of it now, and we're very good at it on a social basis. We keep communities alive with it, so you should be able to apply it to your career.
So you've talked about us being extroverts.
Yes.
How do you increase somebody's personal visibility, especially if they're introverts? And how do introverts network compared to extroverts?
Well, I think it's because, we've just come out of COVID. And I talk to industry leaders all the time, and they're saying, we're having a really hard time getting people coming back to the office. And I actually pulled up some stats on that. And for people who are working remotely, it's the slide we'll see a little bit later on. it is impacting women on a much more negative level than it is men, because you're not seen. And it's tough enough as it is. And so I think one of the things that we need to focus on is how do we get ourselves into a position where we're more confident in terms of talking to other people, understanding what needs to happen outside of COVID, going into the office more often. That sounds awfully, this work from home stuff I think is a killer for a whole bunch of things. Sales, networking, business development. I talked to HR folks and they said, we're begging our people to come into the office one day a week. And I said, a lot of those people are introverts or they've moved far away, and you really have to get out of the house. I mean, literally, it's as simple as that. And go to the office more often or wherever it is you're networking. And COVID set a lot of us behind, men and women. But I think it's acute for women to recognize that they need to get out more often and go to the office or go to networking events in order to move forward. And it's been a slow pace coming out of COVID.
And I think it's really important too, because you get a chance to bounce ideas off of people. You know, you're there,
100%.
You walk by somebody's desk, you get a chance to talk to them and say, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about this. And then you get into a conversation. So don't go away. We'll be right back with more networking because this is really important. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. To discuss networking and self-care for women, I'm joined by Carol Penhale, President and CEO of Bedford Park Associates. So Carol, this has just been a huge discussion today. Does the type of job or career plans that somebody makes make a difference when evaluating the importance of networking? Now, you and I are in financial services, so that's a whole other discussion.
No, absolutely. But I think talking about something we discussed earlier, the world is changing a lot. And so, evaluate, where are you today? Are you in the job you want? If you're not, what is the job you want? That's half the battle, is knowing what you want to do. And then are you passionate about it? And then aim your networking events and your network to correlate to that. You need to be ruthless with your time and not just do everything that comes up as a networking opportunity. We're very busy as women. And some of the stats I read indicated that the women who are more likely to be in executive roles were either single or they were divorced and they had one or less children, where the men, they might have 3 kids at home. Very few women have 3 kids at home and are balancing all of this. I mean, It's a lot. We all know that. But you need to make time to figure out where you are and where you want to go. And then be ruthless in terms of, does this networking event make sense for me? Do I need to do other types of events? I'm in category A. I'd like to be in this career. Maybe I need to go and find out what that's all about. I know lots of people who golf. I don't golf for networking very much anymore because it's like 6 or 8 hours.
It's a full day.
That's a full day. And I love golfing, but I'll go golfing with my family more so than I will for professional stuff, because it's just a very big time suck. And as much as I love golf, it's very tough, and you have to get very narrow in terms of what you look at. And you have to think about building yourself as a brand. Very few jobs now, you are there and you're there for 40 years. You leave school, you join a job, you're there for 40 years, they give you a gold watch. Yeah. There's less loyalty between employees and employers anymore. And so you have to take that into account. And networking is a way to build up a contingency plan for if, God forbid, that happens. Who do you call to find a new job in your industry? Right. So if you've built up your network, you have a good contingency plan. And one of the stats I read is women are 1.6 times more likely to be laid off than men. So we have to prepare even more than the guys do. I have no idea why that stat exists. I find it pretty infuriating. But it's something we need to work with as we go forward.
We constantly have to prepare for everything. We have to prepare for more money. We live longer. We have to prepare for being let go.
Yes.
So are there any other additional benefits to networking once somebody gets into a stronger plan and routine in place?
I think absolutely. Some people never want to be on a board of directors or a CEO or, manage their own business. But there's a lot of things that people look at in terms of, where am I today? Where do I want to go? And if you get it to a place where you're managing other folks, then you have to hire folks. And so networking takes on a very different hat. Where do I find the people to put on my team that I can trust to get stuff done? So that's one of the other caveats. So it's not a one and done. And a lot of women have a tendency to rest on their laurels of what they've done in their career rather than recognizing they have to have ongoing continuity, which is going to be a huge concept for some of your folks to get, because it is for me still. But that's what we do. We think, oh, my CV is going to look great, or they know I did all this stuff, and it doesn't shine through quite often. Right. So you have to be vigilant, and this has to be, a lifetime event, is promoting your career.
Okay, so we have less than a minute to go.
Yes.
I just want one more. COVID had a networking impact.
Yes.
What was it? And then any last words of advice?
I would say pretty high on my list is COVID did have an impact. You have to get off the chairs and get out and see people. And as hard as it is to do, it changed. Everything's moving digital. So finding a job, if you haven't had to do that in the last 4 years, is going to be more difficult because they're not in the newspaper. They're relying on technology. Mm-hmm. AI is ruling you out. It's depressing. So you have to do that type of stuff. And also, there are new jobs being invented every day. And if you're not out learning, saying, I don't know what that person does, but I'd like to do that. That would be an interesting career. And that's a good way to learn that as well. As I mentioned, I look at networking as the sweat equity component of how we advance our careers. And I think people need to focus on that, but it needs to be purposeful networking.
Thank you so much, Carol.
My pleasure.
Before you attend a networking event, have a plan. Ask yourself these questions. Who do you want to meet? Who needs to meet you? Why are you there? And what is your end game? Don't cancel in the last minute. Put on your comfortable shoes, smile, and go and meet people. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Bye for now.